For diets that are at the opposite ends of the spectrum, there's a lot that both carnivores and vegans agree on. This video will try and offer a balanced view of both diets through the lens of health and cardiovascular disease, then discuss lean mass hyperresponders. Plus, I think you'll be surprised by my conclusion at the end of the video. There are 9 similarities between these two diet communities and only 2 differences. The first similarity is their goals. They both want you to be as healthy as possible for as long as possible, free from cancer, cardiovascular disease, and dementia. Both communities agree that if we move away from a typical Western diet to an optimal diet, we can add up to a decade of healthy life. And at the moment, cardiovascular disease represents 32% of all global deaths that can and should be prevented. There is also growing interest in the idea of Alzheimer's as a metabolic disease that affects the brain. Both communities will agree that getting your diet right can offer immense benefits. The second similarity is weight management. Both communities agree that we need to be at a healthy weight. And unfortunately, worldwide obesity has nearly tripled since 1975. Obesity is a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease, including heart attacks and strokes, and it's not just about the excess weight, but the inflammatory processes and metabolic changes that come with it, which strain the heart and blood vessels. I see this all of the time at the clinic, where patients who are overweight, if we check their inflammation markers, they are through the roof. A healthy weight is critical for managing type 2 diabetes. Excess body fat, especially around the abdomen, is linked to insulin resistance, where your body struggles to manage blood sugar levels effectively. This can lead to a cascade of health issues, from nerve damage to vision problems. Obesity is also a major risk factor for cancer. And even your bones and joints benefit from a healthy weight. Obesity increases the risks of osteoarthritis, where your joint cartilage wears down. The extra weight puts more pressure on the joints, such as the hips and knees, and accelerates that wear and tear. Patients with obesity often suffer from sleep apnea, where they wake up feeling incredibly tired and have morning headaches. And both communities will agree that if we can reverse these processes, we can significantly improve a patient's health. We can make them wake up feeling energized, have less wear and tear from their joints, and have reduced cancer rates. Finally, there's an important link between obesity and mental health. So which is better for weight loss, the carnivore diet or the vegan diet? Well, both camps will say that their diet is best. However, meta-analyses from the studies that we have so far suggest that most diets are roughly the same, and the differences between the diets are too small to be significant. The current view suggests that the best weight loss diet is the diet that you can stick to. There is no one diet that's going to work for everyone. So if the vegan diet works for you, brilliant. Equally, if the carnivore diet works for you, brilliant. The third similarity is that both communities agree that we want to aim for low blood sugar levels. High blood sugar can damage blood vessels and nerves, especially those in the eyes, kidneys, and heart. This damage increases the rates of cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, and vision problems. And both the carnivore and vegan diets, when planned correctly, can help lower blood sugar levels, but in different ways. The carnivore diet, which is low in carbohydrates, can reduce spikes in blood sugar levels. The vegan diet, on the other hand, is often rich in fiber. This means that there's slower, more gradual rises in blood sugar levels. Plus, the high fiber content in these foods helps to slow down the absorption of sugar, providing more stable energy levels. So both diets can help, particularly if the overall calorie intake is restricted. And just like the weight loss studies, the latest meta-analyses suggest that there are many different types of dietary patterns that can be effective for type 2 diabetics. Again though, the goals are the same. Both communities want us to have low blood sugar levels. The fourth similarity is blood pressure. Blood pressure is the force exerted by circulating blood on the walls of blood vessels. When this pressure is too high, which is known as hypertension, it can lead to serious health problems. Hypertension is often called the silent killer because it typically has no symptoms but can lead to heart attacks, strokes, and kidney failure. Both the vegan and carnivore diets can have significant positive effects on blood pressure levels, but through different mechanisms. The vegan diet, through its emphasis on fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, are rich in potassium, and potassium helps to balance the amount of sodium in our cells. High sodium levels are a known risk factor for high blood pressure. And while meat does contain potassium, it's generally at lower levels compared to fruits and vegetables. On the other hand, the carnivore diet eliminates processed foods, which are often high in sodium, and because both diets can result in weight loss, that will also help to lower blood pressure levels. The fifth similarity is the importance on micronutrient health. 31% of the population are at risk of at least one vitamin deficiency. And both communities recognize how critical it is to reach our recommended daily intakes for both vitamins and minerals. For the vegan diet, they are often lacking in B12 and need to rely on supplements and fortified foods. The carnivore diet, on the other hand, can lack vitamin C, and there was a famous example recently where James Blunt was diagnosed with a vitamin C deficiency after eating a meat-only diet. My overall point is that both communities agree that we need to reach the recommended daily intakes of our micronutrients. The sixth similarity is no smoking and alcohol. For years, many believed that moderate alcohol consumption, like a glass of red wine a day, had health benefits, and this belief was largely based on studies suggesting that moderate drinking could improve heart health. However, recent research challenges this notion, indicating that there's no level of alcohol consumption that can be considered safe for health. As for smoking, the detrimental effects to our health are widely documented. Both communities agree on this. The seventh similarity is the importance of protein. A growing body of evidence suggests that higher muscle strength is associated with lower all-cause death rates. This is why the clinical guidelines suggest to increase protein intake to maximize the benefits from resistance training. And it seems that the magic number for protein intake is 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. We've also got great evidence published in the British Medical Journal showing that higher protein intakes are associated with lower death rates. So protein intake from the carnivore diet generally isn't a problem, but the vegan diet needs to be carefully crafted, and it sometimes needs to be supplemented with protein powders to reach this target. The eighth similarity is the importance of exercise. Exercise has wide-ranging benefits for our body. It increases energy levels, decreases cancer rates and cardiovascular disease. It also helps to maintain a healthy weight. And the final similarity between these communities is no yelling or swearing. So both the carnivore and vegan communities have influencers that often yell and swear at the other side. This is not helpful, and the vast majority of both communities can see through this, that those particular influencers are ego tripping. So that's a big list of similarities between these two communities, despite the vastly different diets. The two critical differences that I can see are the ideas about fiber and blood cholesterol levels. But there is a path to bridging these differences. More about that later. When it comes to fiber, the vegan community will often rely on graphs like this from large meta-analyses showing that higher fiber intakes are associated with lower all-cause death rates. And that particular study was funded by the Health Research Council of New Zealand. The carnivore community, on the other hand, will generally dismiss that research by saying that it's simply demonstrating healthy user bias and that correlation doesn't equal causation. Moving to blood cholesterol levels, medicine's current understanding is that the higher a person's LDL cholesterol and ApoB levels are, the higher their lifetime risk of cardiovascular disease. There's even suggestions in the literature that the optimal LDL cholesterol level appears to be the level that's present at birth, so between 20 to 40 milligrams per deciliter. But on the carnivore and ketogenic diets, people who are lean can see their LDL cholesterol levels skyrocket, their triglyceride levels to go down, and their HDL cholesterol levels to go up. This phenomenon is termed lean mass hyperresponders, and here's David Feldman, who is one of the leading people who are exploring this phenomenon. And then we'll talk about how we can bridge this knowledge gap.
Hi everyone, this is from a recent talk where I simplified the lipid energy model and how it can explain high LDL cholesterol for lean mass hyperresponders, particularly from a traffic jam analogy. It's meant more for a lay audience, but for a deeper dive, you can check out our lipid energy model paper. Enjoy. What might explain the lean mass hyperresponder triad? Well, this is the one section where I'm going to talk a tiny bit of biochemistry, but don't worry, I'm going to keep it laser focused on those key elements. This is, of course, the boat, what's known as a lipoprotein, and it's a vehicle for transporting lipids in the blood. And in particular, we're interested in very low density lipoproteins, VLDL, which precedes LDL. And it comes from the liver, and it's rich in triglycerides, typically triglycerides that were assembled from fat you got from around the body. Triglycerides are the storage form of fat. So you have this boat, it's packed full of lipids, both triglycerides and cholesterol, but also fat-soluble vitamins and many other things that your body uses. And the lipid energy model, it centers on this high turnover of triglyceride-rich lipoproteins. So they're all packed tightly with all of these triglycerides.
And with this VLDL turnover, we have three things I want to draw your attention to. And it's three things among many, but these three are the most important. First, the VLDL that's rich in triglycerides, it's going to turn into a triglyceride-poor LDL. Why is it doing that? Why is it going from something large to something small? Well, it's because it's dropping off its cargo. It's dropping off those triglycerides into the cell. And through some different enzymatic activities, this gets accomplished. There's something else that's kind of important that probably most of you don't know about, which is that there's a fleet of HDL particles nearby that are small, and they actually pick up a number of the components that come off of this process. So it can be a little bit messy. Yes, there can actually be, as the VLDL is shrinking and it's dropping off those pieces, the pieces that can get picked up from small HDL can ultimately result in large HDL. That's kind of how I like to describe it now for lay people, which is that you could think of ApoB lipoproteins like our VLDLs. Their job is to start large and get small, whereas the job for HDL is to start small and get large, but they can only do it through this process. And this helps explain lean mass hyperresponders, because more secretion and turnover of VLDL into LDL could result in higher LDL concentration. You're mobilizing more of these triglycerides into the bloodstream. But because of this turnover of these ApoB lipoproteins, it's liberating more of these components to be picked up by HDL, and that could explain the higher HDL cholesterol. And intrinsic to this, when you're metabolically healthy, the lower triglycerides are going to result from this increased turnover. That can explain the lower triglycerides and why this triad seems to be so ubiquitous across all these different populations, all these ages, all these ethnicities. But why would those who are specifically leaner and more metabolically healthy have the highest likelihood of exhibiting this lean mass hyperresponder profile? Well, for that, I want to talk to you about large fat cells and traffic jams. This is a freeway, probably not the freeway that's outside us right now, but yes, this is one kind of freeway, Freeway A, and now we've got Freeway B. And I want you to pretend that you're a truck driver, and I'm telling you, trucks are so dangerous. There's been so many studies that show how bad trucks are. And then you look at those studies and you find that they're only ever on freeways like Freeway B. Do you think that might be a problem for the science? I think so. And with that in mind, let's talk about the major exit ramp. So, this study, called Fat Cell Size, and it gets into the measurement methods, pathophysiological origins, and relationships between metabolic dysregulations. Never mind the mumbo jumbo. It's looking at adipocytes, that's our fat cells. And when they get more and more engorged and larger, they become dysfunctional. And as they become dysfunctional, they can also even die. And often you'll find more and more macrophages, which are immune cells, are attending to them. And sure enough, this has a lot of associations with what they call dysmetabolism, or lipid dysmetabolism, which I would call just dysfunctional lipid metabolism, and its association with cardiovascular disease, which, don't worry, we'll unpack that in a moment. But note from this paper, from Figure 6, as especially visceral fat cells, those visceral fat, of course, is around the midsection especially, but it's a special ectopic fat that as the population of those adipocytes are larger, they tend to associate with greater fasting insulin, HOMA-IR, and fasting glucose. That probably doesn't surprise you. But likewise, they tend to associate with a lower and lower level of HDL cholesterol and higher triglycerides, and also increasing LDL cholesterol. And that's why it kind of makes sense to me as to why you would see all of these go in a collinear order, why it's important to look at them all separately in that fashion if looking at them together as to why they would be together. So now I want to go back. I want to go back to this aspect of the lipid energy model, and I want to backtrack and say, what if this cell surface was accepting less and less triglyceride delivery? And because of that, therefore, there's going to be less of the conversion of triglyceride-rich VLDL into triglyceride-poor LDL. And then, correspondingly, if there's less of that activity of the turnover, that means that small HDL particles are going to less and less convert to large HDL particles. Well, I know all the doctors in the room would know why I would circle this over here, right? If you've got a higher association of triglyceride-rich VLDL, small HDL, and thus less HDL cholesterol, that's extremely relevant because we might just be looking at a traffic jam in the simplest terms. So here's my picture way of trying to describe it. Metabolically healthy, I'm not surprised if you take a blood test and you see that they've got low triglycerides and low glucose. Whereas somebody who's metabolically challenged and they've got worse fuel flux, that they might actually be seeing a lot more triglycerides and glucose. Does that mean triglycerides and glucose are in fact the cause? Well, I'm very interested in what's ahead and what's causing that traffic jam. But importantly, a key difference here is to bear in mind that VLDL are carrying these triglycerides, so they're also seeing the vehicles that are transporting it. It's very relevant when you're looking at ApoB, if ApoB is part of that larger lineage of both VLDL and LDL. So, now I have to ask an extremely rhetorical question. Why wouldn't delivery failure by lipoproteins be relevant for the diseases they are associated with? I hope that lingers, because that's an important point that I would love everybody, layperson to lipidologist alike, to keep in close consideration. Atherogenic dyslipidemia, it's been around for decades. And yes, it's a typical feature of obesity, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes. Atherogenic dyslipidemia is this combination. If you have low HDL cholesterol and high triglycerides, it's very likely you will have a preponderance of small, dense LDL particles.
So a study is going on right now to explore the lean mass hyperresponder phenotype to try and figure out if these people are at a higher risk of cardiovascular disease or not. This study is measuring the non-calcified coronary plaque volume from baseline until the final visit to try and establish the rate of change of coronary plaque volume for people that are using this diet. That rate of change is then going to be compared to the Miami Heart Study, so we'll be able to figure out if lean mass hyperresponders do have accelerated coronary plaque volume accumulation or if it's just the same compared to other diets. And the final difference between these two diets is ethics, but that's outside of the scope of this video. For this video, I just wanted to focus on health and cardiovascular disease. So there are important conclusions when comparing these two different diets. The carnivore and vegan communities, despite a vastly different diet, agree on a lot. And the two central differences with respect to health and cardiovascular disease seems to be around the ideas of fiber and blood cholesterol levels. With the lean mass hyperresponder study, we will hopefully be able to answer important questions about the carnivore and ketogenic diets. It's important to find a diet that works for you. There is no one diet that is going to work for everyone. So if the vegan diet works for you, brilliant. Equally, if the carnivore diet works for you, brilliant. The caveat to that is that until we've got the results from the lean mass hyperresponder study, we don't know the effects of the raised LDL cholesterol levels. The medical community strongly suspects that it does increase cardiovascular disease. However, the carnivore community strongly suspects that it won't, and that's why trials are done. We don't know the answers. For me, I'm happy with my high, lean protein, Mediterranean style diet that's primarily plant-based. That's the one that works for me, but just because it works for me doesn't mean that it will work for you. And I can't overemphasize that our health on the inside gets reflected to our skin on the outside, so make sure to check out this next video here on all of the evidence-based strategies to reverse the signs of skin aging.